Live stream. Here we go. Oh, I forgot the crap. Okay, well, we should be live. So, hi everyone. How you doing? I'm Vajasha Raptor. Welcome to another episode of Random Respawn, where we talk about gaming news, gaming things, and gaming stuff. Over there is Calebite, and then that new beautiful face is Dr. Baghdaddy.
Nice, love it.
Oh my God! As always, it's good to see you all. Wallace, howdy, man, howdy. Sorry for the late start. It's all part of moving pains. But so Marshall is not here, so I decided to so today's as I keep just mumbling over myself, today's podcast is brought to you by the letter P for podcast. Sean, or Dr. Baghdaddy, we talk a lot off camera because we're brothers. And we were talking about the new God of War and our thoughts on it. And Sean wasn't crazy about it in general, but he also didn't like how they changed God of War to such an extent. And so we started thinking about games that have kind of reinvented themselves as a franchise and whether or not that's been beneficial to them or not. And yeah, they kind of like that. And so we'll talk about games that we think did it well, whether or not this is something new, or if this is something that kind of happens all the time, and for some reason people are really upset about God of War. And so there was actually a post on the True Gaming subreddit where it seemed like they were mostly negative views about the new God of War, and not necessarily the story-wise. They just don't like that it was a God of War that was different than previous God of Wars. So, I mean, I can start this, or someone else can, if you guys want to chime in or anything like that.
Well, I'll give a brief synopsis of our conversation. Hold on. I want to say before I begin that I am an actual doctor. I'm not just calling myself Dr. Baghdaddy. I have a medical
cared about
doctor.
Unless you're a video game, or unless you're a doctor in video gameology, then no one cares here. Because we're not talking about like Surgeon Simulator or any real life video games.
Because Surgeon Simulator is very.
Here goes your financial stimulus package. The future. Okay, so yes. So what I said was I saw the trailer. I have loved the God of War games in the past, although I've only beaten 1, 2, and 3. I think there was another 1 or 2 after that.
There were a couple for the handheld.
And then I played the Mortal Kombat with God of War DLC, and and he was a good character. Kratos. That DLC was worth it. He's the God of War. Well, Ares is the God of War.
Right, Kratos.
War guy, Kratos. Yes, he was even good in Mortal Kombat, I'd say.
I agree.
At least the first one was revolutionary, wasn't it? In terms of, I mean, Devil May Cry. But in terms of the combat, I mean, think about how many games have copied it since then. Like I said, Devil May Cry. There was Dante's Inferno, which was garbage.
Dante's Inferno was garbage.
That game is good.
Similar in terms of the style of game. But the first God of War was amazing. They followed it up with a great sequel. And God of War 3 for the PS3 was just beautiful. And then I saw the trailer, and it just like wasn't vibing with me. Like, he's caring for a kid. I'm like, what is this? The Last of Us? It just doesn't seem like the type of, like, he's never been a fatherly figure. He's been like a ruthless, just out for revenge.
So
it would. Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. Yeah, finish it, because there's so much lore that you don't know about God of War that just makes me so angry. It's so mad.
So, anyways, I'm trying to think of what a good example would be. To me, it would be like if the Hulk had like a little baby. Like, not Bruce Banner himself having a baby, but like if the Hulk was given a baby in the comic books and like was like nurturing and raising the baby. It's like he's just a killing machine. That's what he does, you know?
But in the comics,
it just seems off-putting.
The Hulk always protects children. It's like he's got like this crazy instinct because he's like basically an extremely strong child. He cares for other children and things that are basically innocent. Like he'll throw himself. Yeah, go ahead, Caleb.
And the whole reason that Kratos is a killing machine is because his family was killed.
By him. Like, he killed his family. That's why he's white. Those are the ashes of his wife and daughter. He is forever cursed to bear the white ash of his family members that he killed because he was tricked.
For the term Caucasian.
He was so that is literally why he's so angry. Literally the first God of War, he has nightmares of killing his family over and over again. And the only reason he agrees to help Ares and the other, oh, actually, he agrees to help Ares because Ares gave him the strength to kill all of these people. But then he accidentally kills his wife and daughter, and then he gets cursed, which is why he's all covered in ash. And then he makes a deal with the other gods and basically like, will you take away my nightmares if I kill Ares? And they're like, we'll make you a god of war. So he kills Ares and he's like, now take away my nightmares. And they're like, we never promised you that, boy, but you are the new god of war. And so that kind of pisses him off. And then so he ends up killing the gods with the help of the Titans. And the Titans were just using him to kill the gods. So then he just kills everyone. So all of this was because of his wife and daughter. And even in God of War 3, one of, like, when you go to Hades, which is something you just do in every game and they make fun of it, he's like, I've come out of Hades plenty of times before. But when you're there, one of the games, or one of the, not mini games, one of the sections is you having to fight off a bunch of people trying to kill your wife and daughter in like a house. So to,
Yeah, I remember that part.
yeah, so like to be like, he doesn't love his family. It's like, that is literally the only reason why he's so angry.
Right.
Kid come from, and you think if he loved his family, he would, like, I don't know, not take this kid out to fight all these evil demons and monsters. I just don't. Okay, so I think one of the main issues I am concerned with is that it's been sort of like a twist on Greek mythology, and I think Norse mythology they've even like sort of brought in a little bit. But where in Greek mythology would this fall? Like, what story arc are they telling? Because he's already killed Zeus, right? And Hades and
Norse
Hermes.
mythology in this game now. They've changed gods.
Right, they've changed gods. So it's one of those things like where, yes, it was Greek mythology, but at the very end of the third one, he has the option to, I think, like, open Pandora's box or, like, reseal it or do something because the world's out of balance. And then he realizes that if he gave this power to Athena, then it would just start a cycle again of the gods. And he didn't want that. He basically wanted everyone to have free will, essentially, just in a very aggressive Kratos way. So he refuses to do it. And then the world is kind of like all chaotic because Poseidon's dead, Zeus is dead, but then it kind of levels out and there aren't any more gods in general, but there aren't any more Greek gods because those are the ones he killed.
Okay, right. Okay.
And so with this one, I like that. I mean, it's a god of war. So, I mean, he already doesn't like gods in general. And so these are just another set of gods for him to do things with.
Like, do you think that they'd ever just jump the shark and just have him, like, kill Jesus?
If they keep it up, it depends,
They might.
because some people believe of him, like some people believe that he's a prophet, not necessarily a god, but it's
Right.
we're not a religious podcast, that's for sure.
I think there's things that stem off from this, some really good conversation pieces, and we can keep talking about the God of War. But one of the things I wanted to touch on was, like you said, other games that have kind of not jumped the shark, but just changed so drastically. The style of game doesn't change, but what comes to mind is perhaps like Wind Waker. It's still a 3D game, but people didn't like it at first.
People hated it. They wanted another Majora's Mask or Ocarina of Time. You're absolutely right. They hated that art style.
It was a big shift, yeah. Especially art style.
If you just play through the game, though, it's just a work of art. It's wonderful. It might be my favorite Zelda game. But I didn't even like the way it looked or the stylization at first. So I think time will tell whether it's a good game or not. But the shock of such a drastic change, even though it's the same style of game, I think that's not going to be received well by the gaming community. They're not fans of change.
Yeah, but it's almost like one of those things like where it's like, I don't think a lot of gamers know best, and it sounds bad, but at this point, yeah, I mean, Caleb, you'll feel free to chime in at any time, but it's like you've had 3 God of War games for the major PlayStation consoles. You've had, I think, 2 or 3 extra ones that were just handheld, and then they've re-released it 2 or 3 times since then. And if you want another God of War game, where did that spoon come from? So if you
didn't they do Ascension too?
Yeah, Ascension. Yeah, Ascension. Oh wait, I forgot about Ascension. That was actually on the console, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That was on PS3.
Yeah. So there's like even more God of Wars where it's if you want the same game, play the old games that are the same. I mean, I know you mentioned Devil May Cry, but the reason that God of War's combat is the way it is because they wanted to mimic Devil May Cry. They thought the combat in Devil May Cry was extremely good and fluid, and they didn't feel like they made it as good or as fluid as Devil May Cry. So they've kind of been working on that. But these huge combos and things like that, it's like, you know, it's kind of like what you said. You've got these mash button or these mash X to beat up people games already, like Bayonetta and I mean Devil May Cry and all these other games that are really, really good. I mean, Bayonetta is phenomenal. Vanquish is phenomenal. You know, you've got these awesome games, and it's like, you know, do you try and mimic that, or do you just go in your own direction? And you know, I guess that's the question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
Dante's
always
Inferno too, though. There's a way to
Dante's
do it
Inferno was
badly.
totally different.
Yeah.
And Dante's Inferno was good. I liked that game. It wasn't the best, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty fun. I like to see when games take a shift like this, but still stay true to the core of what the game is, because that's like one of the major benefits I feel like of this medium in gaming is that flexibility that you're offered. Because you know, for whatever reason in a movie, it doesn't feel as natural when it changes. So, you know, like you completely change the cast, like in, and then call it the same thing or call it even the same series.
Doctor Who.
But with a game, like you can completely change the art style and it still is believable that it's the same world or the same kind of characters and things like that. So I think that flexibility is not used enough. Now, granted, it can be done wrong when games change, but like look at Resident Evil 7. That is a completely different Resident Evil game, and if you didn't know, if it wasn't called Resident Evil 7 and you were just watching it, you probably wouldn't even know that it was a Resident Evil game. But it's a different way to tell that kind of story, and I think they did a really good job with it. As much as I was hating on it when it was being announced and like coming out,
I did not care about it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't care about it either. But I think that they've done a good job with that. And sometimes they can do the changes wrong, but go ahead.
I think it's a really good point because you know, I loved Resident Evil 4. It's probably my favorite.
That was also a huge change in genre. Res 4.
You still had Leon Kennedy, right? It wasn't. It's still a 3D. It's a 3D shooter. It's always been a 3D shooter.
No, it was always a fixed camera top-down shooter. The ability to actually rotate the camera around and aim was new. In the previous Resident Evils, you just pointed your gun straight and then just kind of
over the shoulder was new in Resident Evil 4.
No, I mean
it was top down.
It was.
It wasn't over the shoulder. It was top down or fixed camera angles. Like they had the camera up in the corner of the screen of the room or whatever, and it was tank controls, and it wasn't over the shoulder. The over the shoulder was new with Res 4. It was still the same characters, you're right. But
so just like God of War.
But controls and everything were different.
Same character.
Style of game is very different than from Resident Evil 4. But then they kept the style for Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6, which I was so excited for Resident Evil 6 before it came out because like it's got Leon and Chris.
So bad.
Debated.
But the trailers for it are amazing, so good, and it was awful. And then Resident Evil 7 was sort of like this low-key surprise, like Caleb said. Like it doesn't a Resident Evil game because they're not doing the character is completely new, right? But it's still a horror sort of like escape house style of video game with the Resident Evil tag, and then people loved it. I haven't played it personally, but I know that it's gotten great reviews. It's one of the best games of the year. I think Yahtzee thought it was one of the best games of the year. So,
right,
he says
it's done really well, and I'm pretty surprised that at all the outrage of the God of War change, because to me, so I was when I was thinking about games to bring up and talk about today, I kind of made 3 separate categories. I had games that fell into what I called a notable change. So it's like it's different, but yes, Wallace, I'm not wearing my Superman shirt today. I did finally change. But so games that fall in like a notable change where they did something different, but it's still pretty much the same game in almost every way. It just is maybe a different art style or a different something is noticeable, but not really a core change. Like Mega Man 7, for example. Mega Man 7 is very different from all the previous Mega Man classic games that came before it. It is on the Super Nintendo. The character models were way different, and some of the level design elements were different, but like they changed how the game looked pretty drastically, but it's still a classic Mega Man game. So that was an example of one that fell into a notable change. And then I had games that were really big changes. like Resident Evil 4, where it's still, and that maybe even is a notable change. You know, there's some argument there, of course, but like that and some of the changes they did with the Metal Gear games or Grand Theft Auto, going from, you know, the top down kind of pixelated look to then the full third person open world kind of game. Like these were big changes. And even the Castlevania series, going from the level to level Castlevania 1, 2, 3, and then eventually coming out with Symphony of the Night, which just took the Castlevania setting and threw Metroid at it, and then was like, holy crap, this is so different, but you know, it's still Castlevania. And then there were it's basically a totally different thing, and that's like Resident Evil 7. So those are kind of the three categories that I had made, and my bring all of this up because God of War to me feels like a notable change. It doesn't even feel like a big change because it's still God of War. The combat's still, I mean, it's
Brutal.
third-person hack and slash. You know, there's executions. Like, yes, they're changing some of the mechanics. They're changing it from a top-down camera or a fixed camera to an over-the-shoulder. But like, it doesn't. I don't know. It didn't feel that substantial to me. Like the biggest thing was the change in story. But for me, that's not like a big deal with games, really. Like, yeah, but maybe I just think about it differently because I value gameplay more than game story, so maybe that's why it wasn't as outraging to me. I don't know.
Yeah,
What are your thoughts?
it's like, I mean, it's one of those things like where I wonder if like people just couldn't openly complain about things that much before, but now they can. Because I mean,
That's true.
I mean, if you look at Metroid Prime, the first Metroid Prime that came out for the GameCube, it went
Oh
from,
yeah,
I
I
mean,
totally forgot about this.
yeah, a 2D, you know, side scroller game with Samus, and then all of a sudden it's a 3D first person shooter game,
Yeah,
and it was phenomenal. And
yeah.
it's like, I mean, there's so many games have completely reinvented themselves, and I don't know if it was just back when people just didn't have a medium to complain about it all the time, because even like even Zelda went from top down to 3D. Mario went from 2D
Right.
to full 3D environment. I mean, so many games have gone through drastic changes in their life, and
Yeah, I mean, any franchise that survived, you know, the Nintendo age and Nintendo Sega era, any franchise that's come from there has made some kind of change because just the gaming industry has changed so much. Console platforms have changed so much, you know, and then PC and all of these things. So like any of those long-standing franchises, yeah, they've all gone through one or multiple reinventions.
Well, hold on. So, okay, I get that. Oh, these are all examples of franchises that have done it well, though, right? So we're talking, you know, Super Mario, the Mario 64, Metroid, Zelda. What about,
Castlevania
you know?
didn't jump to 3D well.
No,
Castlevania
it
3D
was
was
real bad.
horrible.
Well, hold on. I was going to just bring up more examples, though.
Yeah.
Well, from Nintendo, I mean, Banjo Kazooie just the third
Oh, yeah.
installment was just
Nuts and bolts or whatever.
And
Yeah,
the
but that
other
was by
thing that comes to
Microsoft.
mind is
Yeah.
Assassin's Creed, which has been largely hit or miss throughout the franchise.
It's also been the same game though.
Right. Well, I
Right.
mean,
So that's what I'm saying is like, okay, is God of War going to be the same game, but they just stylize it different, or is it going to be a different game that time will say was good, or different and time will say well is bad? It's sort of this like limbo. I feel like they enough, or you know, if they're doing something, maybe they're not doing enough to change it, or are they trying to like play both sides with it? They're trying to make it different enough, but also pay homage to the fans of the franchise.
there's like a really weird like school of thought like at Square Enix, and especially for Warcraft. Warcraft also changed drastically. That's a really good point. But so there's a really so basically the Final Fantasy franchise, every new game until they got to Final Fantasy 13, every single new game they completely scrapped the world. They completely scrapped all the characters, and they basically kind of kept like maybe the same classes, but every game was totally different. You know what I mean? It's like there wasn't a sequel, and so it's like no one bashes Final Fantasy being like, I mean, even the combat constantly changed throughout the series. I mean, come Final Fantasy, was it 6 or 7 that actually introduced the ATB?
Yeah, I don't remember. It was
Right.
one of those.
And then
I know 7 had it, but I don't know if 7 was the first one.
and then
I know 7 had it, but I
yeah.
don't know if 7 was the first one.
And then it's like, I mean, they've constantly kind of been reinventing themselves every game. I mean, maybe not combat wise, but I mean, it's like complete world building and all these other things. And it's kind of accepted. And so I don't know why people are so mad. I mean, when Final Fantasy 12 came out, it totally changed the combat. And Final Fantasy 12 was actually like, I think that was a really good game. But a lot of people were kind of upset because it just wasn't another Final Fantasy 7. I feel like, I don't know. It's such a like a weird
I think
thing.
11 changed pretty substantially too.
Well,
Didn't 11 go to the real time?
No, 11 was an
Or 11
MMO.
was the MMO one. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. That's right.
And
12
then,
was the real time.
yeah, it's well, kind of real time.
Yeah.
But then it's like you've got these franchises that completely just like scrap everything and start from new, and it seems to like go by the wayside. But then you've got God of War, and like a lot of people are complaining that like it's not a hack and slash franchise, but like to me, it's like you can be a hack and slash without just constantly mashing a button. It's like as long as it's satisfying combat and then it looks brutal as anything. And
yeah, like I still consider the over the shoulder view a hack and slash. Like
right. And
it's
so
still not a third. It's not going. I mean, it looks more like Gears of War just from oh yeah, it's a big dude over the shoulder camera and like brutal executions, but that doesn't mean it's going to play like Gears of War, and it's not a shooter. Like I still consider it a hack and slash. I mean,
yeah, well, it's like a lot of people are complaining that it's they're like, oh well, they just wanted to milk the franchise. And so, honestly, that could be it. But at the same time,
I mean,
to me, it's like they're like,
yeah.
well, if you just took the main character and changed his name, it could have been anything. And then it's like
that's
literally
true
for
for
any
a lot of
game, you
things.
could do that for any, yeah, exactly, any game, any first-person shooter. If you took Master Chief and put in Gordon Freeman, now you've got a Half-Life game. It's like it doesn't matter that you can change, like anything is possible. Like, oh yeah, if we put Mario in a Metroid Prime game, it's now a Mario game, no matter what. So it's like that's not an argument to me. That makes me.
And it's Super Smash Bros.
Yeah, exactly. Then you got Super Smash Brothers, right? If you kept both of them in there, not just like a swap.
Right.
And so for me, that doesn't matter. But what I'm most excited about is to see someone who was so brutal and ruthless and able to kill gods to show a somewhat softer side, because you saw that in glimpses, and it's why he's so angry all the time. But to have a kid knowing that he's killed his last wife and daughter, and like I feel like it's just going to be him not stuck with this kid. I think he loves this kid, but he knows that the last thing that he actually loved literally led him to basically destroying the world. So it's like, how do you balance that? And so for me, what a cool character, because if you take this character and completely change it, but leave their past exactly the same, whereas Devil May Cry, what they did with DMC, it was a reboot. So everything that Dante did and was awesome and known for didn't matter anymore. But this isn't the case. Right. They're like, hey, this is a God of War game. It is a sequel. He is still fighting gods, but now he has a son, and because of his past, he's kind of basically cursed his son and family in a way or not, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that because they are trying to tell the story from a drastically different angle, or at least a drastically different starting point, maybe it might be that the story ends up in the same place as all the other God of War games, but they're at least starting off somewhere different, or trying to sell it as a different kind of angle on this storytelling. I think it only makes sense to change the way that the game looks visually, like from your perspective of how it changes and some of the combat and all that. I think it makes a lot of sense to change that from a base starting point, because if not, then you can't tell a different story than the other games, because it will look just like God of War 1, 2, and 3, and people will want exactly what it was told and how it was told in God of War 1, 2, and 3. And so like they're trying to do something different with it. So whether or not it's good, we don't know yet, but they're trying to do something different. So to me, it makes sense to change a little bit about how the game plays, or the game perspective, or things like that, because you're trying to continue to evolve the story and the character. And yeah, I think it's really cool that everything that's happened in the first 3 games matters, and there's going to be references to that, and like, being a part of that world as, a player from God of War 1, like, there will be things that you'll understand or have references to that other people won't. So it helps it feel connected from a lore perspective, but that this is a different chapter in Kratos's life just by looking at the game from, you know, any kind of gameplay. You're like, oh yeah, this is a different, it's a new God of War. It's not like, which one is this? You know, you can tell right away that it's a different part of the story. So I think that's cool.
I'm not as convinced, I have to say. Maybe it's because I'm kind of cynical. Another thing I dislike about the game is, if you ask anybody what their least favorite part of Resident Evil 4 is, it's usually going to be babysitting Ashley. And any game with a sort of babysitting mechanic has not, at least for me, my least favorite part of that game. For instance, we mentioned The Last of Us. Anytime that you're trying to protect I forget the girl's name, Ellen Page.
Ellie.
Oh, that was pretty close, actually.
Yeah, Ellie Page.
Exactly, Ellen Page.
Ellie Page.
It adds to level. It doesn't make it more difficult in a fun way, in a challenging way. It makes it more difficult in a frustrating. They haven't really made the NPCs, that intelligent that they're always getting themselves in trouble. That's what I liked about Resident Evil 4 is you could just tell Ashley to go sit in the trash can and I'll figure this out,
right,
and then you can come running.
That's what you liked, but the second half of the game was totally an escort mission. I mean, you had to make sure she didn't die, but they did it in a good way. And that game was, oh man, was it 10 years ago at this point? Maybe even a little bit more. So it's like,
probably more.
Right. And
they did it better than any game has done it before, but it's still my least favorite aspect of that game. If I had to say, well, what are my favorite missions? I guarantee you none of them are the ones where you're dragging Ashley through these corridors,
right?
And trying to
it's supposed to be
make it so she's not killed,
right? But I totally agree. But Ashley
and yeah, I agree with you.
But it's like, I mean, Ashley was there for plot reasons. I mean, they kidnapped the daughter of the president. I mean, the plot was ridiculous, like every Resident Evil plot is. But
right.
it's like it served a purpose. It wasn't just like protect this thing for the heck of it. And so I can see that hesitation in the new God of War, but it's at the same time, it's no one knows, and it's one of those that we don't know yet. We'll have to see when it comes out. And if it's a bad game, then it's a bad game no matter what they did. But in terms of the direction that they're taking it, I can't fault the game for trying to take it in a new direction. And I like the way that they seem to be doing it.
Yeah, I agree. And you're right. You're absolutely right that escort missions are like, they're typically the worst. So if that's one of the major worries that you have, like, okay, that makes sense. That's like one of your main concerns is, oh God, it's going to be an escort mission game. So, all right. But we don't really don't know how much of an escort mission it's going to be, or how much it's just going to be the kid's kind of there and can do things on command. Like, I don't really know. From
what we've seen, it kind of seems like when the kid gets captured at points, they almost seem like they were scripted as part of the story that we've seen at this point.
Right.
And a lot of people are like, oh, Kratos is going to kill his kid, and then he's going to go all ragey and then kill a bunch of things. And I don't think so. I think everyone's expecting that. I honestly think that I think Kratos is going to die, and then you're going to play most of the game as the kid. I think that is either how it ends or how it's going to, and then he's
well, who's going to want to play the game as a little boy when they're buying the game so they could play as Kratos and kick the crap out of people.
Right.
That's like buying
Red Dead Redemption did the exact same thing. Like the main character that they showed in all the trailers. Sorry guys, but this game's been out for so long. But he dies. He dies, and his son takes over. I mean, and then you're like, wait a second, is this actually it? And you're like, yeah, that's it. You're playing this game as his son, and the main character in all the trailers is gone. And so if that's the case, then it's like
Metal Gear Solid 2.
Oh yeah, Metal Gear Solid 2. I mean,
but that was a Kojima, so like,
okay, who knows what that guy is crazy,
right?
Yeah, so
but still,
it's one
happened.
of those. Yeah, it's one of those things where you don't know. And so one of the things I looked up is they just said Kratos looks like he doesn't belong in there. I agree, he doesn't. He shouldn't look like he belongs there. He's
right.
from a different time and place. And the way that they had it set up, it seemed like that there were different, not necessarily universes, but that there were different realms of some sort, and he happens to be in this one now. Or it could just go in like some sort of chronological order where like Norse gods slowly became into prominence now that the Greek gods were done. There's kind of a lot of lore that we don't know from the trailers.
Yeah, I just kind of assumed that he was trying to get away from it all and start new, so he was in a whole different place. Yeah. Like for whatever reason, it wasn't jarring to me that he used to be in a world of Greek gods and now he's in a world of Norse gods. It's like, hey, well, he's probably trying to get away from all the stuff he left behind and start a new life.
For sure.
You know, he's clearly trying to forget and trying to raise his son. So like, I don't know, it worked for me.
I hope that if they do another, if they not necessarily, because you're not really rebooting the franchise, I think you're drastically changing it. But I'd love if the next one was like a first-person shooter. It's just like, yeah,
What?
yeah, and then you have to take on like the I don't know, what's another? You have to take on the Egyptian gods in the next one because they keep every new god series that they do is just drastically different gameplay. So
you gotta fight Joseph Smith.
Yeah, dum 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 dum.
That would be.
I want to hold on. I want to bring up another example because my Hulk one was brutally rebutted. Okay, so imagine I got two examples. Imagine like the Batman games, right? Now you say like, okay, you trained Robin, but you don't want that aspect of Robin in these Arkham Asylum games. You don't want to be carrying around Robin and training him. You want to go out as Batman, kick the crap out of people that need to be kicked the crap out of, things that need to be detectivized, and be the Lone Ranger type of character.
Actually,
and I would say the same thing for.
I thought the combo fights in Arkham Knight was one of the best things that they did with that game, where you got to fight
combos, which was frustrating with me. Like I jump over to one character and like punch to the ground. I'm like, oh god.
The second you switch over, you get punched in the face. Like they're getting ready to be mid punch, and then you jump to them, and then insta combo gone. Actually, Sean, I do agree with Sean on this point. But what else were you saying?
We're good.
Or I was gonna say like a Grand Theft Auto game. Like you want to be that guy that goes out and does all these things on its own and not have to worry about something tagging along that you've got to worry about. It just doesn't feel right.
In Grand Theft Auto, I would always drive in my lane, and if I had a car, I would always make sure I came back to that same car. And the game
you stop at the red lights?
It sucked. Yeah, it was so hard. You're not supposed to play it that way. And they made sure that I knew you weren't supposed to play it that way. But yeah, no, I definitely see what you're saying. That's definitely that's a good point. I mean, you don't necessarily. I mean, I guess you could have a game with young Bruce Wayne like they did with the show Gotham on Fox. And from what I've seen, I don't really like that show. So you've got a point. You know what I mean?
First season was actually pretty good.
Oh, I did not see it.
But it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't great.
It was the worst season ever. Never watched.
It wasn't a great show, but it was okay. I liked. Well, this is a whole different discussion, though.
Yeah, yeah,
I liked.
It really is.
I liked just being able to see like the different origin stories for different minor villains that you don't in the other movies, because that was basically the point of it. Is like that Bruce Wayne doesn't die. That Jim Gordon doesn't die. Like there's not a lot of tension that they can have in there, but you get to see a different perspective on the origins of lesser known or even bigger known villains. And so I thought that was kind of cool, just because you won't get a movie about those. But then it the acting just got really, really worse, and I don't know, it deteriorated. But I appreciated what they were trying to do with that kind of story, with that kind of thing, and not just telling the life of Bruce Wayne as a kid.
So, Sean, I mean, you made a good point. If it was a Batman Arkham game and then they did a switcheroo and you played as Robin the whole time, I can see somebody getting kind of angry about that. And I see your point about God of War, where if they switch it up and you're just playing the kid the whole time. But in Last of Us, you played as Ellie for a good portion of it, and no one was really mad about that. It was just part of the game.
The game sucks, so nobody cared.
Right, exactly. And then so Sean actually called Last of Us, or he was like, God of War is just, I think he called it God of Us, because it's he said it was The Last of Us. And I was like, well, Last of Us was just Uncharted with zombies. And we just kind of kept going back and back. And he's like, well, Uncharted was just he didn't say that. He didn't, because it was weird. But it's one of those things like where like, yeah, I mean, if you basically say, oh, it's based off of this game, you can always go further and further back until you get to like Pong. Right. You know what I mean? It's like, well, this game has a score in it, so clearly it's exactly like Pong. It's like
you can very easily break games down to their like core components, and every shooter is the same. Then like any first person game they're all the same. Yeah.
And we know that's not the case. I agree.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I mean I do agree with you though. Like if Batman, just on the surface of it though, but see, I guess I can't really explain why it still seems appealing to me, even with the prospect of God of War being a escort quest mission the whole time, like the second half of Resident Evil 4. I don't know why I'm still interested in that. I am, and I can't really explain it. So I can definitely see where, if that's what you think it's going to be, why you'd be apprehensive, and it makes total sense.
Can we think of, so as a whole, I mean, there are so many games that have I mean, even Tomb Raider. I mean, technically you're still playing as Lara Croft, but they completely changed the story. They completely changed the way the game functions and her motivations for everything. So,
Right.
there are so many games that change drastically throughout their lifespan. I don't know if many actually keep a continued timeline like God of War is doing. I think that's kind of new, and I think that's interesting. But do we think as a whole this is something to be commended, or do you think that they were just trying to milk a established IP for the sake of cash money?
Well, if you look into the Zelda books, like all the Zelda games are in a timeline. It's not.
Oh yeah, technically there's but none of them. I mean, but then the timeline splits. So then at that point, it's like it doesn't matter anymore, right? Yeah.
It's not like a trilogy kind of timeline where the next game and then it follows the next game. I know exactly what you mean. I just wanted to be an ass.
We have Marshall for that.
But is this a new company that's making this God of War game? Like, you know how Bungie was making the Halo games and then it switched over to that new company?
343, yeah.
Yeah, and they did a pretty good job with a couple of them. Is it a different company that's making this game, or it's the same company?
I don't actually know.
I don't know. I don't know either.
I was kind of wondering because
that is a valid question and one that I should have looked up.
Yeah, no, that's I'm checking out right now. Yeah, so developer is it is Santa Monica Studios. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that they did the first God of War.
Okay. So in that case, I would have to say, it takes guts because you have a product that works and sells well, and then you have the balls to try to change it up.
Mm-hmm.
It's commendable. I still don't think it'll work. We'll see, but it is commendable. As opposed to like we mentioned before, Assassin's Creed. Like, let's not change anything up because people will still buy it.
Right. Assassin's Creed, Call of Duty,
Black Flag, and everybody loved Black Flag because they're like, wow, this is something new and different, and it plays well.
Even the newest Assassin's Creed is, from what I've heard from people who've actually played it that just don't hate Assassin's Creed, is pretty good. There are some elements of it that are absolutely awfully implemented, but I've been kind of surprised at all the positive things I've heard about it, which is, I thought that series was just, no one bought it anymore. I thought that was the rule with Assassin's Creed, is that they'll release it, but no one will buy it.
Right. Somehow that's not the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I think it does take a lot of guts to try and change without, like, barring a technological excuse behind it. Because, like the Mario games and all those old franchises that we were talking about, they all did reinvent themselves, but they had to because the technology was changing, and it was like the whole environment of gaming was shifting from the 2D to the 3D thing. And so that was the next big thing they had to get onto. Whereas with God of War, like, there isn't a big shift to the over the shoulder. Like, that's not a new fad that they're trying to get in on.
Whoa.
Yeah,
over his shoulder?
So I think it does take a lot of guts to do that kind of a change. But I like it because I like seeing game franchises and stories, and I like seeing things evolve. And so I'm happy to see it, and I'm interested to see how well it does. And a lot of times I end up liking the oddball game in like a franchise. Like you said, Wind Waker. I mean, Wind Waker is great. And then there were I had another example of an oddball, but now I can't think of it.
There are so many oddballs that don't work out. Like, Mario is an exception because they switch from 3D to 2D, and they always seem to make it work.
Then they did diagonal 3D.
Like Super Mario World.
Yeah.
You're right.
The Odyssey itself switches from 2D to 3D, and then they can do RPG too with like Paper Mario's. And I mean, they can literally do every game well.
So that's actually a good point, because Paper Mario to the Wii was way different than Paper Mario Thousand Year Door. And I was a little
Good,
upset by that. I wanted another turn-based Mario game that was just bigger and better looking, but it wasn't a bad game. It just didn't hit my expectations of what I wanted, but it was fine.
Yeah.
Cats.
Uh,
My girlfriend bought Burt's Bees waterless shampoo for our cats, and she just sprayed it on Truffles, and Truffles bolted.
I thought you were going to say she bought Burt's Bees chapstick for the cat.
Burt's Bees, bees.
And then was putting it on the cat's lips. And I was like, that's weird.
That sounds like I would do.
They clean themselves.
So I guess, here's another question for you guys.
So Mario changed, Paper Mario at least changed, and we didn't like that. I mean, it was still a good game, but it was nowhere near the original and the Thousand Year Door, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. But it's
Right.
Sonic changed, and everybody hated it.
Sonic has changed so many times. I love Sonic Adventure 2 personally, and I don't know why it gets so much hate now.
I love seeing when games change and then change back, like Mortal Kombat, and then they did Mortal Kombat 4 and the 3D thing.
Deception,
and then they went way down with the 3D thing, and then they're like, okay, nobody's buying Mortal Kombat anymore. Let's change it back. MK9, woo, classic.
And they technically, it's still a continuation.
It's
Raiden
still a
travels,
yeah.
Was it Annihilation? Was that the last one?
I think so, yeah. And then, well, actually, 9 was a reboot in that it like told the story of all of those other games, or at least up to a point, and then 10 was supposed to continue on with that, but then it kind of got weird and But then like
You're not
Mega
playing
Man, Mega Man did all kinds of things, and then Mega Man had all the changes and spin-offs, and they had the Battle Network.
Oh
and
yeah,
Battle
Network was a great game.
It does, yeah. They've got a whole bunch of those like that. I think that series has done pretty well. And they had, but they did try Mega Man Legends, which was the 3D adventure type game, and that one was real bad. I didn't enjoy that at all. And then they're like, you know what? Fuck it. Let's go back to the original formula, Mega Man 9, and that's like my favorite Mega Man game ever. So
oh yeah, that's what you love. Yeah, that's absolutely.
I love Mega Man 9. But then they continued. They like did that and tried again with Mega Man 10, but it wasn't the same. It didn't. They tried to like take itself too seriously. So it was the same, but it wasn't. And I don't know. So they didn't drastically change anything from 9 to 10, but whatever. I don't know why I'm rambling about that.
This God of War is not going to be good, but then the next one they make is going to be phenomenal.
It honestly, it could be. I mean, so here's a question that I have for you guys. So Santa Monica Studios, they are the ones who did God of War. They internally developed all of them, not including ports and stuff like that, and they're internally developing this one. Do you think it is easier or harder for a company to take such an established IP and completely change the game? Do you think that way up on, I don't know if Sony's bankrolling this game or not, because I think it's a PS4 exclusive, but do you think Sony's like, oh no, do you think they presented Sony with an idea and Sony's like, we don't like this as two different throwing God of War? Or do you think that they brought in, they're like, hey, we want Kratos to kill Norse mythology, and they're like, no way, don't touch the God of War series. We want that stuff to be with Greek mythology, make another prequel. So like, which one do you think is I don't know, which the pendulum swings? I don't know, some metaphor.
It's argue that it's easier to do something so drastically different, but whether or not it's successful is a whole other issue.
Yeah, it's really tough to say, because I was thinking about like Team Fortress. It's the same concept of game, but holy crap, is Team Fortress and Team Fortress 2 different?
So different.
I don't know. I think that the motivation to, given that we don't know anything about true financials and earnings and everything from what the games were bringing in, I think that it could have been one of those God of War 3 and subsequent God of War games that were the same style as God of War didn't do as well as they wanted them to, or they were starting to dip the other way in sales, and that they needed something new to revitalize the franchise. They felt like it was getting stale, and so that change was more openly accepted than just like, okay, we're going to make God of War the new one, and it's going to be the exact same thing, just different gods. You know, I think that sometimes, depending on the state of the game, you know, like with Assassin's Creed and things, once, I don't know how they haven't yet, but once they reach the point where people really aren't buying them anymore and they just aren't working, then we'll see a big change. And it'll be like, yeah, okay. They want to reinvent it, keep it going, bring in all the old fans, but do something different to get people, a different group of people excited. Because that's one of the main reasons you make big changes like that, right? Is because you want to attract a different audience. And I think, anyway, a lot of times, so you want to bring in a new crowd of people, so you can get a lot of new adopters into the franchise. And I think that's,
you don't necessarily think it's harder. You think it's almost necessary.
I think sometimes, yeah, I think it is.
That's interesting. I think
now well, yeah, how you go about it and how drastically you do those changes, yeah. But I do think that it's necessary to stay relevant, because as like, gamers are the worst community, because they're the worst, right? Because we get bored with things and we want new things, but then we don't want things to change. But that it's like, it's the worst, literally the worst. But yeah, I think it is necessary to stay relevant, because you can't just release the same game in the same way over and over and over again, because eventually even your core audience will get tired of it, or your core audience will be so small that you just are actually losing money doing anything for it, you know? So I think that kind of evolution is, yeah, I think it's necessary.
I was thinking about the question, and I do think that both of you are right. I do think that, I mean, so I think this is the biggest way that I think the movie industry differs from the gaming industry, and it's that Disney will never let Mickey Mouse do anything that isn't Mickey Mouse. Whereas you've got Mario doing Mario things, and then all of a sudden he's racing go-karts, or he's playing soccer, or he's doing tennis,
shooting rabbits,
right? Or shooting rabbits. So it's I mean, in Mario, yeah, I mean, Sonic, you've got him racing cars, doing all-star Olympic events with Mario, being terrible at so many games. You've got like they do these things with IPs, it seems like, all the time, and have crossover events. Whereas like for movies, I feel like a lot of times your IP is way more, not necessarily valuable. That's not the word, but it's like, it almost has more of a sacred mentality for
I was
the
gonna
studios.
say sacred.
And I don't necessarily think that's a good idea. And it's one of those things. I mean, even Star Fox Adventures, that was a totally different game, and they were like, "Hey, let's throw Fox McCloud in there." And General was it General Scar?
Nobody cares.
Yeah,
I don't remember.
Scales. General Scales is his name. They had a fake language, but then he says General Scales in English perfectly, which was always real jarring.
That ruined the entire franchise, doing something like Star Fox Temperatures.
Yeah, it didn't do it any favors, and then also not having a decent follow-up game for years and years didn't help either. I mean, if they had another good Star Fox game, I don't think that it would have been an issue. Because don't get me wrong, Mario's been in some not great games. Most of them are crossovers, but it's one of those things like where it's like, you know, I was thinking that it would be harder to put a known and loved character into some random game. But the more I think about it, the more it's been done over and over and over again in video games, but not so much in movies. And I tend to default to movies with video games closely behind it. So it's, I guess that is a good question. Do you think this was originally intended to be another IP of some sort, and then they were like, let's make it God of War? Or do you think...
mean like a Doki Doki Panic / Super Mario?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, that wasn't very good, although I feel like it's got a cult following now. But
think about everything that came out of it was, I mean, Bob-ombs came out of it, Shy Guys came out of it, Birdo, yeah. So a lot of insanely like iconic Mario characters came out of this game, which is
it wasn't even Mario.
yeah,
totally
right.
Not even Mario.
I think I would be most worried if God of War was a teen-rated game and not M, because I think that at its core, it is a brutal, disturbingly gruesome game where you rip things in half by hitting circle when they are already dead and getting their health balls, and then literally ripping wings off of a dude to be able to float around. I mean, you know what I mean? It is just an insanely gruesome and
Right.
brutal game. And if it's still that gruesome and brutal, just maybe not the hordes of enemies you kill, but still that level of violence, then it's a God of War game to me. You've got Kratos. He seems to still be Kratos. He still seems to be this just absolutely terrifying guy who has literally killed gods and titans and was made a god himself. But now it's like, who do you give someone that has never lost a match to any? Like, he can literally kill anything. But it's like at that point he's almost killed his humanity. So it's like, does he keep on to it and take care of the son, or does he go back to what he was doing? I mean, he was miserable killing all these gods anyways. So it's really interesting.
Right.
I see what you're saying. There's added purpose to the storyline now, which is something that they needed after he killed all the Greek gods. So
yeah, like where would he have gone from the end of 3, having killed everything? It's like, how would you do? Where would it go? So I think that this kind of change makes sense.
You do another prequel, like, I mean, it's just like
exactly. Like,
you do another Spider-Man origin story. Like, it's just it's done.
How many of those do we need? Yeah.
But we at least have examples of where it has worked and where it hasn't worked.
Yes,
for sure. And I think that a good thing that you mentioned there, Josh, is it's still there's a lot of ways that it's staying true to the core of what God of War is, which is this visceral combat and the story of Kratos, and like it's staying true to that. So while it is trying to reinvent itself in maybe a perspective or a game mechanic way in a little bit, I think that's a large part of what makes these other game franchises that have reinvented themselves in different ways, made them successful. Is Mario games have changed significantly from one platform to the next, or from one perspective to the next, but it still feels like a Mario game. And whatever that means, they've stayed true to that, and they haven't made it a game that it isn't. And when they have, like Doki Doki Panic, it still somehow worked. But
like Star Fox, it didn't. You know what I mean? It's like
Star Fox didn't feel like a Star Fox game.
It was like Spyro and Crash Bandicoot that really didn't change at all, and they just fizzled out.
Exactly.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
Yeah.
So I think executing well on that shift is very difficult, because you do have to maintain whatever that game feel is, whatever that world environment, everything that is that game, what makes people like it and what draws people to it, keeping that intact while changing the platform or changing the perspective or changing the core game mechanics. That's incredibly difficult, and I would never want to do it. But I think that's like the secret sauce of being successful in a way a game changes or not. And I think that was what did it. Like DMC was the same basic kind of game, even like mechanics wise and everything was still pretty much the same, but whatever it was about the original DMCs, that macabre feeling and the gothic style, and the new one didn't feel Devil May Cry. It felt very like edgy and punky, and people didn't like it. It changed that whole game sense and feel. And so it's interesting. We'll see if people are just so whiny that the new God of War doesn't work, or if it just sucks and it doesn't work. But
yeah, and
if I think that the change is necessary.
Yeah, if it sucks, it's gonna suck regardless of their intentions, and we've seen it. I mean, are they still making new Halos? Because I feel like that franchise has definitely fizzled out, personally.
They just made Halo Guardians, I think was the last one.
I know that they were up to 5 at one point.
No, Halo Guardians was, I don't know. They are still somehow making Halo games, not as frequently, but like they're not the every year release like Call of Duty or Assassin's Creed, but they are still making them.
But then the one time that Halo tried to evolve, they did Halo Wars, and that was not well received.
Actually, I think Halo Wars was, but Halo Wars 2 sucked.
Oh, well,
maybe they both sucked.
I'm not saying that it was critically bad or a bad game. I just know that no one wanted that in a Halo game. But it's just like,
right.
I wonder if there's a certain amount of time that literally has to pass in between IPs, because between Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild was like 5 or 6 years. So it's like, I mean, Halo Wars came out, I think, in between Halo 2 and Halo 3. So it's like, I wonder if like you need the break from the franchise. Like you have to have
That's
a break.
true.
You have to make them kind of forget what it used to do. And then it's like, oh, hey, this is kind of, I forgot about this guy. This isn't exactly what I remembered it being, but you know, I remembered liking this character or something like that. And then you would just accept it more. And I feel like enough time has passed to evolve Kratos.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very valid point that we didn't really even talk about, the timing between the last release and the new release. I think that's pretty critical.
Mm-hmm.
I'm ashamed I didn't bring that up before. That's a very good point.
Yeah. So I can't think of anything else more to say. Do any of you guys?
Well, I did want to actually just say this. I'm going to go hijack the channel right now. For the people who are watching and people who watch on YouTube, Random Respawn's still a very small community. And when they were starting up with their podcast, I'd always email them ideas. Some they liked and would actually talk about on the podcast, which I thought was really cool. And then some they'd be like, we don't really feel like talking about that. But here I am on my very first podcast with Random Respawn, which is actually a really cool feeling, especially if you've been watching them for a while and you like what they have to say. And there's no reason with the community as small as it is that you won't be a part of the show one time. And I think that's a really neat aspect of Random Respawn that you should take advantage of if you see this and hear what I'm putting down.
Very nice.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Baghdadi. We do appreciate it. We do value our fans greatly and the input, and we really appreciate it anytime Sean would send a topic suggestion, because it meant we didn't have to scramble to come up with something. And so we love it. We love receiving suggestions. So if you got them, send them our way. Absolutely. And
involved, and if you have something to say it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Wallace is a big supporter in that way. He was our logo the other week because he made a special iced donut for us.
Special Random Respawn donut, and it was awesome.
It was.
Yeah. So definitely appreciate the shout out. That was
Thank you for that.
Gonna happen. But yes, Caleb, go ahead and do the recap.
Yeah, so to recap, we talked about some game franchises that have really changed over the years pretty drastically, and some that have not changed and haven't continued to do well. So it's interesting to look at games and how they continue to evolve and stay relevant, and what they do to change in ways that are well received by the communities, and in ways that they just miss the mark and change the soul of the game, as it were, and lose their following. So specifically, we were speaking about the new God of War, how it is trying to change and be slower and more of a heartfelt story, at least in some ways, but it still is trying to stay true, from what we feel, Josh and I anyway, to the essence of God of War, but hopefully doesn't become an escort quest, a glorified escort quest of a game. So we'll see. And to Dr. Baghdadi or Sean's point, we don't know what it's going to be, and time will tell if it ends up being a good idea or a bad idea to change. But I personally think that games and franchises, just like movies, you need to change and evolve to stay relevant. So it's neat topic to talk about. Sorry that Marshall wasn't here to chime in, since he was the one who kind of brought it up. But
but all of
I've enjoyed it.
All of his opinions are wrong all the time.
It's true. He's
got phenomenal opinions, but they're always wrong.
They're always wrong. But yeah, I've enjoyed this discussion. I thought it was really fun looking at some games that have changed over the years. And if you enjoyed the podcast, definitely give us a like. Hang out on the next one. We do this every Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern, or in some cases 7:30 p.m.
Sorry about that. This was an exception. This is not the rule.
That's true. We've actually been surprisingly good at 7 p.m. Eastern. Anytime we do random gaming stuff on stream, we're on Twitch. We are Random Respawn, and hang out. We love hanging out with the fans and the peeps. So we'll see you next time.
All right. See you guys. Bye.
See you later.